Hello, everyone. Giving everyone just less than a minute to join, and we can kick off. See, quite a few people are joining right now. All right, as people are coming in, I can just start off. Maybe to start off, I can say thank you for everyone for taking the time to attend the event today, which is a part of our COP26 series on green recovery, the role of nuclear and renewables. I can introduce myself. I'm Sanjana Achar, your chair for the day. I'm a chemical engineer turned management graduate who works in Equinor right now as a management advisor for the executive vice president of renewables at Equinor. And I'm currently an ambassador for Equinor for the Young Energy Professionals Forum, one of your organizers for today. So as the event begins, maybe to kick off, I can also introduce our organizers for today, who are the Young Generation Network, or YGN, whose mission is to really encourage and develop UK's early career nuclear professionals and ensure that their voices are heard through shaping the future of the sector. Our second organizer today is a friend of new nuclear energy, so Phone, who are independent advocates for educating and inspiring new audiences to the benefits of nuclear energy. And the third one is the YEP Forum, or the Young Energy Professionals Forum, which is a network to promote the latest generation of the energy industry professionals, giving us opportunities to collaborate, develop, and recognize success. So today we have some great speakers here for you. We have Matthew Day, Danielle Lane, Garrett Richardson, and Claire Rose, who will each be presenting on topics related to the green recovery. All of whom will not actually be using slides today, so it'll be quite a interactive session. And I will introduce each of their topics and each of the speakers as we go along. And we will have one question after each of the speaker and move on to the next speaker. So if I could ask each and every one of you to keep your microphone muted during the duration of the presentation, and really please be engaged, put your questions in the Q&A box, and at the end of all of the presentations, we will take your questions and address them. So with that, let us start with our first speaker for the day, who is Matt Day. Matt Day is a strategy manager for EDF Renewables. He is responsible for developing and articulating the EDF Renewables growth strategy on onshore wind, offshore wind, solar energy storage, green hydrogen sectors in UK and Ireland. Before EDF, he worked for 4 years as a consultant and a researcher in the oil, gas, and LNG sectors, and graduated from Imperial College, London, with a master's degree in geophysics. So, Matt, the government is looking to build back better and greener following COVID-19. Where are we now, and how can we achieve the green recovery? The floor is all yours now.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today. It's a great forum to talk to, and I love talking energy in any forum, especially to young folks as well. So we've got some really good speakers after me. So I'll try tee things up a little bit and talk about the green recovery and how we can grow renewables and energy in the UK. So I think we're all here and we all know this, that there's a clear climate emergency facing us in the UK right now. We've seen floods across northern Europe and in London, and issues in North America, and this is all with the backdrop of COP26 coming up. So we know that we have to fix our ecosystem, and we need to reduce emissions as quick as we can. And in the UK, the government has legislated for this with their target for net zero for 2050. So this net zero target means we need to reduce all emissions by 2050 across all sectors. And to do this, we're going to have to do a fundamental transformation of our whole energy system. So in how we produce energy, how we distribute it, and how we consume it, as we move away from fossil fuels into new clean energy sources. So we've made some, quite good progress over the last few years, especially in the electricity sector. We've largely got rid of coal out of our electricity sector. We've established a great renewables industry in this country, but we have a heck of a long way to go. And if we look at how far our carbon budget and how close we are to net zero, we are behind the pace of what we need to do. So we really need to accelerate what we're doing in the UK. So one document I just want to point folk to. People might have read it, but I'm just going to use it as a reference point for this quick talk, is the National Grid Future Energy Scenarios. It came out a few weeks ago. It's a great document to read. I'll put it in the chat later. It is produced by National Grid, so they have some vested interest in it. But nonetheless, it's a great document to look at and to explore how the energy sector needs to transform. And they look at different scenarios of how we're going to reach net zero, and there's lots of different ways we can get there. But if we look at the scenarios by which to get to net zero, the one key theme across all of it is how we need to decarbonize electricity sector, not just decarbonize it, but also grow it. And the numbers are really quite massive. So if we look at how much renewables and nuclear generation we've got on the system in the UK right now, we've got about 50 gigawatts. If we want to be on target for net zero, by 2030, we need to get to 125 gigawatts. And to get to, by 2050, we need to get that number to 225 gigawatts. So the key number there is 2030, we need 75 gigawatts of new nuclear and renewable and energy storage. So that's key number I kind of want to take away from that. So I've kind of had a look at some of the pipelines this afternoon to say, okay, actually, is that actually an achievable target? And when we look at the pipelines of what we've got for onshore wind, offshore wind, solar, and energy storage, we've actually got 30 gigawatts right now, which is what we call ready to build. So yeah, by the end of this year, we'll be able to construct 30 gigawatts of that. So that's almost halfway towards our target. Then if we look at the pipeline, so what we can build out into the future, and a visible pipeline, we've got 50 gigawatts already in the pipeline. So we already have 80 gigawatts ready that we can now look out to see that we can build by 2030. And that's comprised of about 1,000 projects across all the different technologies. And it's a really diverse and interesting pipeline. You've got lots of different technologies in there, good split between wind and solar and nuclear and storage. That means they can complement each other in terms of how they generate, but also they produce electricity in different places. So wind typically in Scotland, offshore wind off the coast, and solar in England. And therefore we get a good geographical representation, diversity between different places where we can build renewables. So key message is, right, we've got to build 75 gigawatts by 2030, but we've already got a pipeline of 80 gigawatts. Now, some of that will fall away, we're not going to build it, but also that pipeline is going to grow even bigger. So when we go back to the question of how can we achieve the recovery, we've actually got all of it there ready to build. We just need the right conducive environment to be able to go do that. And this is where policy and government help comes in, but also bravery and innovation from companies like ourselves. So from the government side, we need continued support in terms of the CFDs and revenue support. We've proven that is to lower the cost of electricity, but also enable electricity prices to be acceptable for the consumers. We also need better regulation and support in terms of charging. We need stability, so not things that change every so often. And also we need support from the planning regulatory bodies. So a lot of the planning processes to get stuff developed takes an awful long time. Now, I'm not saying we need to bludgeon stuff through the system, but we need quicker decisions, be it yes or no. So that's all kind of government stuff. In terms of companies, we also need to be, we need to be innovative. So that's thinking about how we can be financially innovative, but also develop new solutions with our customers, but also working with our supply chain as well. So how can we work closer with UK supply companies to not only build out these projects, but also improve that we're doing it in a way that helps create jobs in this country. So in summary, net zero a huge task to get to climate emergency. Now for 2030, we need to get 75 gigawatts, give or take, to be on target. But the good news is we've got a pipeline of 80 gigawatts already, which will grow. So we've got the pipeline, we've got the platform to do that. The question is, how can we do that? And to do that, we need government support, but also we need brave and innovation from our customers. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt. Sounds like we have a very big, pipeline ahead of us and a challenge as well. I was wondering, with this green recovery, do you think there'll be space for newer renewable technologies to flourish? So if so, what kind of technologies and why?
Absolutely, yeah. I've got 5 minutes, right? So I kind of focused on one thing. So I think what we need to do first, we need to do the low-hanging fruit, right? So things like offshore wind, onshore wind, solar, proven, ready, pipelines there. Let's go build it and get to where we need to be by 2030. In the meantime, we also need to develop these new things that you're talking about. And I think a lot of these are kind of just extensions of what we're doing already. A good example, and your company Equinor is at the forefront of this, is floating offshore wind. That's the natural transition away from fixed bottoms. We've kind of run out of soon we will run out of the number of fixed bottom sites we can do. Floating is a natural technology that we can extend to, and we can use what we already know. There's other things, like green hydrogen, which is a lot of hype, a lot about, also blue hydrogen, things like that. I think we absolutely need to get stuff going with those projects, but we also need to be conscious that they're going to come into fruition 2030 beyondwards, and so we need to start doing stuff now in terms of pilot projects and getting the big stuff starting to go. But also we can't lose sight of let's do the easy stuff, the low-hanging fruit, to really get going, and whilst developing those things kind of on the side.
Brilliant. I'm sure we can ask a lot more questions to you right now, but we have 3 other speakers, and the audience, if you have any questions for Matt and the rest of the speakers, please put it in the Q&A box, and we'll get to it at the end. And now I guess we can move on to our second speaker of the day, which is Claire Rose. To introduce Claire, Claire is a Deputy Program Director delivering the £5 billion civils program of Hinkley Point C, and recently seconded into the Delivery Directorate Transformation. She's the advocate for diversity and inclusion and sits in the ICE Ethics Committee. She has a background in engineering and constructions management, leading and delivering major infrastructure projects such as HS2, Crossrail, Pacific Northwest LNG, Great Western Route Modernization, and many more. Claire is a chartered civil engineer and a chartered project professional. And for the talk today, we will focus quite a bit on the nuclear side of things. So Claire, we know that Hinkley Point C is the first nuclear power plant in a generation. And we were hoping that in this chat, we speak a bit about how is the nuclear renaissance delivering job opportunities and skills for the UK. So the floor is all yours, Claire. Look forward to your talk.
Right, can you guys hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Fantastic. Right, let me get my video on. Hopefully it pops on in a minute. Can you guys see me? Okay. Oh.
Yes, we can see you now, Claire.
Ah, wonderful. Then it's all working well. So fantastic. So good evening, everyone. So at 50% of the way through construction, Hinkley Point C is a great example of socioeconomic benefits which can be realised during the construction of a nuclear power station. And it's projected that the total projected economic value of Hinkley Point C will be around £18 billion. Here at Hinkley Point C, and although you can't see the background behind me, as I'm not there personally there today, we've exceeded and even doubled the original estimates for the investment in the southwest alone by £1.7 billion. And these are actually recently documented in the most recent socioeconomic report, which was published earlier this month. The report actually sets out details around some of the far-reaching impacts across every region in the UK, which Hinkley Point C has touched in creating jobs and skills in over 3,600 businesses here in the UK. So is this just a one-off investment in nuclear and UK PLC for that matter, though? I'm going to try and cover that in 3 areas to answer this key question. So firstly, training and assessment, and then I'll move on to our investment in the supply chain, and then future operations and decommissioning. Firstly, so kickstart with training and assessment. As we're building a first-generation nuclear power station, which typically are constructed to a much higher standard and tolerance compared to conventional infrastructure, we need to remind kind of the teams that are working on that infrastructure and try and create a different culture around why we need to make and deliver HPC to be safe, not just now as the opening construction, but have that whole life cycle appreciation throughout. Having grown up in Suffolk personally, I'm just about old enough to remember 1995 when Sizewell B opened, which is a long time ago since we last constructed a nuclear power station in the UK. Now, while some of the same people continue to be helping us build the next generation of our nuclear fleet, many of those who helped deliver the last nuclear power station at Sizewell are nearing their end of their careers in some of the cases. So that's why at HPC we've invested in training and development of the next generation, and that even includes 556 apprentices, and of which of that we actually have nearly 20% female as part of that mix. I think that's a fantastic statistic and opportunity that we have really to bring the next generation in, not just to the whole life cycle, but really the heart of training people up for the construction phase. Now, I mentioned that the requirements and standards are more stringent in nuclear, and we need to develop a skilled pool of people to deliver the construction phase, which ultimately is going to require 25,000 people at the peak of the site build. To develop those available to this standard, we're going to have to invest in that training and development to ensure that we deliver a safe and reliable and fully assured nuclear power station that is going to last not only during its 60-year life, but actually through the point of decommissioning. To do this, we've developed and plan to open further general and really more specific skills centres, including welding, electrical and mechanical centres of excellence. And we're well on our way of actually training that huge number of people that we need. And we've actually got 14,000 people trained and assessed to date. So next up, point 2 of kind of answering that quick question, was the investment in our supply chain. The conventional EPR design has been developed to meet the UK regulatory requirements here in the UK. And we're going to continue to need to invest in our own design capability, both now during construction, but also to help maintain and operate the nuclear power station and keep it at its tip-top shape. We're going to need that increased design capacity also for the future, for future EPC stations that we've got around the UK, such as Sizewell B as well. During manufacturing construction, we have already beaten our target of awarding 64% of our contracts to UK-based companies, providing significant investment with these with the commitments to our supply chain. And what's that really mean? So by providing that forward look ahead of work for the supply chain, they're investing in their people and their capability to win and continue to win work in the nuclear sector, and also invest in the equipment and plant and machinery which will allow them to win and deliver the work to the schedule that we're setting. And it's ambitious because we need to fill that energy gap. This also supports with the government's goal of levelling up the UK economy and helping rebalance the UK rather than over-relying on UK sections or regions, which you'll be aware are probably more wealthier than others. It's also why it's even more impressive to see the levels of local economic investment that we've been able to achieve. and you know, that's been really seen through Hinkley Point C, and how much that we've nearly doubled the original intentions of delivering £1.7 billion worth of investment in the local region. And actually, by beating that, we've really proven you can provide economic benefits to us wherever you base these fantastic pieces of infrastructure. And finally, to answer that final point around the future operations and decommissioning. In the future, the operational EPR stations will need nearly 1,000 operational staff, which is going to be a huge boost to local economies to have that sustained large employer in the region. But it's also a benefit for continued training and development for both new and also old existing colleagues, and I shouldn't say old, should I, with opportunities for both men and women working on the existing fleet, both here at Hinkley, but also all around the country, because a lot of our existing nuclear fleet are coming to their end of life. Now, as I said, a proportion of these jobs are going to have a chance to going towards retraining so that they can operate these new EPRs. But it's fantastic when you think about the life of the infrastructure that we're creating. It's going to provide a planned life of 60 years, and that's 2 to 3 generations of sustained jobs and training and investment. Whilst Hinkley Point C is the first of its kind in a generation, I'm confident it won't be the last. Sizewell C is the opportunity for the UK to continue to secure global net zero by supplying nearly 6 million houses worth of power in the area for the next 60 years. This year, we've seen an unprecedented level of climate change in Europe, and we need to take heed of and find ways to minimise and mitigate increases in global temperatures. And as I'm sure that we've been talking about with our earlier colleagues, later this year, COP is going to seek for countries to come forward with their ambitious 2030 emissions reduction targets to align with achieving that net zero. And I think we've all got a question to ask here: are we going to be able to do this without a future of continued investment and energy diversification in nuclear? I think I'll let you guys all decide. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Claire. You know, being outside the nuclear industry myself, I find it really astonishing and also uplifting to see the amount of upcoming opportunities. And if I could ask you one question before we go to the next speaker, I was wondering if you have any sort of advice to the young professionals in this webinar who are looking to enter the nuclear industry. What sort of key opportunities or any advice you have for the people here?
Yes, so I think the opportunity for those which are interested in moving across into whether civil or defence side of nuclear. I think you got the opportunity by attending lots of different webinars, and hopefully as we start to come forward with unlocking, meeting some colleagues face to face as well, by attending whether it's these types of events in the future or networking events for CPD as well. I think there's also the opportunity of really understanding what availability works in the region and finding out about employers that are seeking roles. But there's lots of opportunities coming up in design, construction, and also even we have to talk about decommissioning, because that's part of the whole life cycle. And so there's a huge raft of opportunities. So I'd really recommend everyone have a look.
Thanks a lot, Claire. And from nuclear, we're moving towards offshore wind for our third speaker, Danielle Lane. To introduce Danielle here, Danielle has over 20 years of experience in the offshore wind, energy policy and regulation. She's the head of asset value and partnering at Vattenfall's offshore wind business and has the responsibility for transactions, revenue management, asset management, and risk. Prior to this, Danielle also worked for Ørsted, where she headed the UK regulatory and public affairs team. and the Crown Estate, where she had the responsibility for design and implementation of the Round 3 offshore wind leasing tender. Danielle was educated at Imperial College and University of Bath, and she has an MBA from Open University. So, Danielle, by 2030, we are planning to quadruple our offshore wind capacity, and we're increasing representation of women in the offshore wind industry to at least a third. And onto your topic, really, how is the industry building a diverse and inclusive workforce? The floor is yours, Danielle.
Oh, hi, and thank you for inviting me to speak to you today. I think it's evident from the two previous speakers that the opportunity in the energy sector is huge, and we've got a lot going on in all kinds of different areas. Now, why do I broaden this to say it's about the energy sector? Well, I think it's because we have a really big opportunity to attract some really fantastic talent, but it doesn't need to just be, and it shouldn't just be, about offshore wind. However, that's the industry I'm in, and that's what I'm going to talk to you a bit about today. As a sector, we are building our capacity. The UK has done particularly well. We've now got around 8 gigawatts of offshore wind installed, which is more than any other country. And the costs have fallen significantly by 2/3 since 2015. So it's one of the real low-cost options for large-scale generation in this country now. We additionally have around 12 gigawatts of onshore wind installed, and that powers about 7 million homes. So when I started in this industry, maybe I think it's about 20 years ago, there was a bit of a question that why would we do wind power? It was a bit niche. People saw it as, you know, the nice thing that tree huggers did. But I would really argue today we're a significant industry, not just in the UK, but globally. And I think that's been really exciting to see. Certainly my career has been one of really taking that opportunity of growth. And it's something I would still encourage people to do because I can see that opportunity ahead of us. But we really can't rest on our laurels. As an industry, as you mentioned, we're looking to grow participation. And I really don't think this is just about women in the industry, it's about diversity and inclusion as a whole. I have to say that today, I really don't think that the opportunity of entering is a barrier, but I do think then the representation is something that we need to work with. We've got about 18% in the current offshore wind sector represented by women. We're trying to grow that to around 33% by 2030, but with a stretch of 40%. I have to say, when we were negotiating these targets as part of the sector deal that the offshore wind industry has, it wasn't as easy as you might expect. There was a bit of a question as to why and how, and you know, it's going to be difficult because a lot of our jobs are offshore. We don't necessarily attract women into the sector. You know, how do we get there? Equally, and even more shamefully, I would say, we have around 5% from Black, Asian and other ethnic minority communities. And we've got a target, as it is, of growing that to 9%. I think this is not ambitious enough, but I do actually appreciate some of the barriers and the hurdles that we have as a sector to actually showing the way. So what do we do? Well, the first thing is we want to attract the best people to our industry. So we need to expand our talent pool. The offshore wind sector deal recognised this, and we've done some really good work in trying to understand what workforce is out there. However, what we need to do is really some tangible actions to really start to reach out to those people who might not have seen the offshore wind industry or renewables or even energy as a whole as a future career. We as a company in Vattenfall have a strategy that goes beyond gender, and we do actually try to reflect the communities we serve. However, offshore is difficult because actually, if you look at the type of population that we're meeting when we go to look at our new sites, if we look at the operations and maintenance spaces, they're not necessarily from communities that are ethnically diverse or necessarily have a high level of individuals who recognise the opportunities outside of what they've been doing on for decades. So one example here would be the fishing industry. We work in areas where that's been in decline, and we've been trying to encourage people, and very successfully, to transition into the offshore wind sector. So some of what we're doing is trying to understand, how do you reskill people and retrain people? And there are many centres there now where we can signpost courses and we can signpost training to bring people through. The other thing is we look to the military. So as a sector, we've been doing really well in signing up to things like the Armed Forces Covenant, where you can bring in different skills and different people into the industry and show them the opportunity again of how skills and training they've had in the military has transitioned into the offshore wind sector. And that can be in everything from operations and maintenance all the way back through to some of the market development activities that we do to bring forward new projects. I think it's also worth noting, though, that talent isn't just about the developer. Talent is also about the supply chain that we use and the wider sector that we're in. So if you look at the statistics in the offshore wind sector deal report on this, we have about 12% of the current female workforce who are graduate engineers. But the rest of them are coming from a really diverse background of other science subjects, mathematics, but also professions in legal and commercial competence as well. And all of this is something that's really areas that we would seek to encourage as the industry grows. But one question that I think was posed at the beginning here was, how do we do this? And I think it's the same for attracting across all industries. It's about showing the value that you can bring, and you have to do that through outreach. So we need to be working with primary schools, secondary schools, and tertiary education to actually show the opportunity that pursuing opportunities in STEM, science, technology, and engineering and maths, can bring. But we also need to be working with local enterprise partnerships and community organisations to have educational programmes that people find accessible and that we can access. The other thing is we need to show that the barriers to entry are not actually that high, that even though it might be an unknown field, that there is opportunity and there are career paths possible from whatever background you're from. So how do you do that? Well, you can do that through open days, online short courses, internships, bursaries, grants, that kind of thing. And all of those are items that are being established both by individual companies, but as the sector as a whole. The other thing is around recruitment. So employer branding is really important, and the different channels that you might use for recruitment, but also the job descriptions. So when things are advertised, there may be an inherent bias there as to the type of how the role is described. So removing any gendered terminology, for example, highlighting the benefits of family-friendly and inclusive environment that you might be working in. Flexible working, as we've all discovered over the last year and a half, is actually more possible than maybe people thought in the past. Not for all roles maybe, but for a lot of them. But one thing I think that is really, really critical, and that is representation. So we need people who are visible and who are accessible and who are representative of the community that we might be trying to engage with. one of the things that I've found working for Vattenfall is it's really inspiring having senior leaders in the company who are female. As an organisation, we have a really strong diversity programme, but we're blessed in some ways because we actually have a really strong management team who are predominantly female. This is quite unusual, but we have a female CEO, CFO, general counsel. The head of my business area is a woman, as is the head of my business unit. So looking up the line, I just see people like me. And I think that's one of the things that we need to do better as an industry to really encourage people into this sector, is show the way and show that people can be present by seeing a face like them. So I think that's the summary of where I am, and I'm happy to take questions later.
Thank you, Danielle. That was a great presentation, and it's really good to hear the work that's being done to get more representation. Being an Asian woman in the offshore wind industry is something that I care quite a bit about. I was wondering, you know, are there any the barriers to getting more people in the industry? Is it different for BAME and women? And what is being done by the players in the industry? So developers, OEMs, government, to sort of address these barriers?
I think that's a really good question, and I'm probably not the perfect person to answer in a lot of detail. But I think there are similar challenges for women and people from ethnic backgrounds, in that we don't see ourselves. Unfortunately, the offshore wind sector, and I think energy generally, tends to be quite white and male and somewhat middle-aged. And it doesn't mean that they haven't brought fantastic value, but it's then difficult to know why you should join in if you don't see people like yourself. And I think one of the things that we've been doing really well recently is challenging ourselves to find people who will represent us who look different. It's not perfect yet, but it is something people are actively working on. I think the second thing that's really important is to look elsewhere. So don't just go to the usual places for recruitment, for recruiting at all levels, and really addressing how you're recruiting is, I think, critical. And that's something that we're working on as a sector. And it's hoping it's bringing tangible results, but time will tell.
Brilliant. It's at least a positive direction that we're going towards. And then now it's time for our final speaker of the day, Garrett Richardson. To introduce Garrett a little bit, Garrett is a chemical engineer with 13 years of experience leading design teams, operation support, and construction in nuclear and low carbon industries. Garrett has worked on the nuclear design for UK EPR radioactive waste systems and was the lead engineer for installation on the first mechanical equipment at Hinkley Point C. Garrett is currently the Atkins S&C level and lead for the Power to X market, working on developing new technologies and markets. And his personal goal is to help the world transition to net zero future as fast as possible. So with that introduction, Garrett, the PM's 10-point plan sets an ambition to develop CCUS and hydrogen technologies to support our UK's net zero ambitions. How are we ensuring a just transition, and how are we upskilling our workforce to meet this challenge?
Hi, thank you very much for inviting me. So I think there's a graph behind me that gives you the global emissions. And you can see how steep that graph comes down between now, which is somewhere about here, and 2050 to hit that 1.5 degrees. And that's on a global basis. So there's an awful lot to be done everywhere across the planet. So there's going to be a global demand for people, resources, and skills. So if I pick up on some of the comments that Matt and Danielle put forward earlier, the UK nuclear fleet is going to be pretty much cut in half by 2030. With Sizewell B, HPC, and Sizewell C coming online, that will make sure that we're pretty much at a standstill nuclear-wise with the rest of the fleet coming off. So as we go forward and we're bringing more wind and other renewables onto the grid, that grid is going to become far more complex. And we have to look at it from a systems perspective to think, well, how do we do this overall? So that build rate that Matt was talking about earlier might end up actually being a huge amount more in terms of the whole system across everything. We've got 40 gigawatt of gas installed currently. Now, the requirement for that flexible load isn't going to disappear by putting more wind and solar on the grid. If anything, it will potentially increase. So we've also got to somehow replace that with some form of either storage, which is probably unlikely at that size, or another form of energy that can produce power without producing CO2. It could be CCUS on the back of something, or it could be more nuclear. So going to the PM's 10-point plan, he set some ambitious plans for hydrogen with 5 gigawatt of capacity being brought online by 2030. This capacity is currently planned to mostly come from steam methane reforming with CCUS. And that still produces an awful lot of hydrogen, about 1 to 5 kilograms for every kilogram of hydrogen that you make. So at some point, there's going to be that second transition that's going to be required, that sort of Matt alluded to earlier, with using electrolyzers and green hydrogen, which will boost our requirements for more low carbon energy even further. Now, some of the other points that the PM had in there, he wants to put a lot more CCUS in the back of the industry as well, putting 10 million tons, of CO2 per year, which is roughly what the current UK emissions are. So hopefully that'll come on. But this transition that we're all talking about will have a huge impact, and it'll have a different impact geographically across the UK. I'm currently sat in South Wales at the moment, and I went past Drax this morning, all the way down to the steel plants in South Wales today. And all of those are going to require energy of some form, and that energy is going to have to come from either renewables or nuclear that aren't producing CO2. So we've got the energy piece, which is a massive transition that we're going to have to handle, but then there's the rest of the entire energy system for producing all the materials and the goods that we use that we still need to transition as well. And that means that somehow we're going to have to do better than we did in the 80s when we transitioned away from coal and we closed all the coal mines. Sitting in South Wales, you can see some of the impacts of that on the community still now to this day. So a better just transition is needed. There are a lot of skills and knowledge in these industries that we're going to potentially be losing. So, the oil and gas industry is going to be in decline in the UK, coal industry is disappearing. So there's going to be a bit of a transition for those people onto new technologies. And we're also going to have to train people in those new technologies as well. So what is a just transition? So I did a bit of Googling on this, and Wikipedia has actually quite a good description of this. It's uniting social and climate justice by means of a just transition means to comply with the demands of impacted industrial workers in carbon dependent industries who lack employment opportunities elsewhere. So that takes me back to the shift that we had back in the 80s. If we expand more broadly, this also impacts the rest of the world. How we transition here and what we do here in terms of the climate impact will affect other people around the world. And we need to help them as well. So it's not just a demand for skills in the UK, there'll be a global increase in demand for skills in the areas that we're going to need specifically. So as I'm speaking to engineers, I'll focus on some of the key areas where we're going to need to be upskilling. And some of those are going to be integration of technologies. So how do you integrate various electrolysis technologies? How do you get steam out of a nuclear power plant and use it for cogeneration? Some advanced ways of capturing CO2, how are we going to get it out of the air? And then there's many, many more that we could come up with that we're going to need in terms of new skill sets. In Atkins at the moment, the engineers we've been bringing on board, they typically state it's our approach to net zero that draws them to us. So I think and in the younger generations, there's a big understanding that there needs to be a movement and we need to do something now. And we see that as they come into our company, and we see these graduate engineers and they're all buzzing to work on these new technologies, and which is really great and great to see. And I think there's to a certain extent, we need to have a bit more work within universities and change the way that some of the topics and the skills that they're being looked at currently, and move more to the new skills and technologies that we need in the future. So that will require setting new masters projects, industry to integrate a lot more with the universities, us sponsoring PhDs and influencing course design. And then once an engineer is in industry, there are many transferable skills between the various different industries. I mean, I've worked in oil and gas, I've worked in semiconductors, and I've worked in nuclear. And all the skills that I've learned as an engineer have been able transferable between most of those. So having a good core base set will help everyone, but you do need to be able to learn and continuously learn through your career to get those new skills in terms of what I've been learning about in the past year or so about electrolysis and building electrolyzer facilities. So if you think about how we've done this in nuclear, Claire kind of alluded to it a bit earlier. We haven't built a new nuclear power station for a very long time. So we've had to go through a small transition there, upskilling people back into the nuclear industry, like myself, to go and build these new nuclear power plants. And we're going to have to do that again for other forms of technologies. So I guess that sort of ends the kind of topics I wanted to go around, but I guess the transition is a big piece for us to go through, and there will be huge impacts across the whole of the UK. Thank you.
Thanks, Garrett. And a quick question before we move on to the next part of the event is, what do you then consider is the biggest opportunity in this just energy transition period for people entering the sector?
So I think, so one thing, I had someone call me today, and they were asking about what should they do with their career. They're about, I don't know, 10 years experience as an engineer, and they're working in the oil and gas industry. And I said to him, well, look, you're going to need to move out of oil and gas at some point, because oil and gas globally is on the decline. It's always going to be on the decline. So what do you need to think about? You need to think about what are the no regrets investments or no regrets technologies that are going to be out there. So you've got things like, we're going to have to somehow get airliners onto sustainable aviation fuel. So somehow we're going to have to upskill in biogenic sources, taking CO2 from the air or the sea and turning that into jet fuel. So that's one aspect. We're going to have lots more in terms of being able to build up our nuclear fleet. And then the other sectors, power to X, to be able to balance all these new renewables that we're going to be putting onto the grid, we're going to have to be able to take some of that additional energy and use that to produce something that we can use somewhere else for making fuels for ships using either ammonia or methanol or something like that. So I think I don't think there's a particular sector. I think just being in any of those technologies now will mean that you will have an incredible career going forward, because there's only going to be growth on a global basis, and there's going to be so many opportunities over the coming years, I think.
Brilliant. That is, I'm sure it resonates a lot with some of the younger professionals in this webinar right now. And maybe they feel like they're in the right place. Before we go to the Q&A, and I see our time is running out, well, I just wanted to quickly highlight to the group of the various ways you can get involved. Now that you've heard things across renewables, across nuclear and various technologies, you can keep in touch with the organizers, the YGN, phone, and YEP through social media, through these links that you see below, as well as, of course, if you want to be involved or put any events of your own, please take note of these emails and reach out to us. And just wanted to quickly mention one of the campaigns that's ongoing prior to COP26, which is called the #NetZeroNeedsNuclear. So YGN has been applying to attend COP26 as a part of the UN FCC accredited NGOs with the Nuclear Society of Europe. And they've organized all of these pre-COP advocacy campaigns, including this webinar. So YGN sort of launched this campaign, the #NetZeroNeedsNuclear campaign, which is to promote awareness that we need nuclear as a part of the energy transition, as a part of getting to net zero. And it's being used as a way for policymakers to advance in COP26 to consider nuclear as a part of the clean energy discussions. So feel free to go on to netzeroneedsnuclear.com website, read the papers that's there, the nuclear for climate position paper, and really, get involved, send letters to your policymakers, get involved in social media campaigns, and many more. So with that call to action and with that engagement, I thought we could maybe go to your questions that you've had over here. And we can start off with a question around the just transition, actually. So this is for everyone. Maybe you can start off with Garrett. There was a question by an anonymous attendee who is asking, are there enough green jobs for everyone in the carbon intensive industries to take part in the just transition? Do you think some people will get left behind? Maybe you can start off, Garrett, and the rest of the panel can contribute when they see it.
Yes, I think there will be. I think it's going to be, there will be a difference in the jobs that they will be doing though, and that's the transition. So if you think about offshore oil workers, a lot of them are moving into the offshore wind industry to support that, but it's a very different job that they're doing there. So, that's one aspect. And then you've got the transition into hydrogen and other industries like that. It might not be the kind of jobs that they've had in the past. It's just going to be different. And that's the thing that people have to think, that the job might not be that nice job sat in a control room running an oil refinery. It might be a job doing something completely different. And I think people need to be, as a country, we need to be ready to help those people transition. And as I was saying before about the transition from coal, we didn't do very well then helping those people transition. So we need to do that now with all these new people that are going to be coming out of those different sectors that are basically going to be shut down due to the drive for net zero.
I completely agree, Gareth. I think the comparison to the coal industry is a very good one, because I think we did it very badly in this country. But I completely echo everything you're saying. I think the things we need to do is not just things like wind turbines and things that we talked about. There's all these other new technologies that we need to do. Things like heat pumps, for example. Putting heat pumps in is analogous to putting boilers in. It's just a different technology. I think the thing in the UK in particular is we struggled, particularly in the manufacturing side and also in the sort of heavy industries. And I think that's where we really need leadership from government and also and local councils and to encourage investment and things like, hydrogen's a good one. There's a great company in Sheffield that are building electrolyzers that could be one of the best companies to do that. And we need support for those industries instead of those industries being offshore to places like China and Asia and things like that. So I personally think yes, it is, but it's going to be very hard to do.
I think I'd also add though that there are hundreds of thousands of jobs needed. I mean, we shouldn't underestimate the sheer volume of people who are going to be needed to deliver the green transition and the just transition. I think I'd also add that for a number of years, the oil and gas industry has been really worried about what they call the great crew change, and the fact that the demographic of their sector is aging. So they were very worried about people coming into the oil and gas industry to sustain it in the long term. So it's not just a simple matter of saying, well, people will move. There are going to be different types of jobs, but I don't think there's going to be a shortage of roles. There is going to be an element of retraining, but the opportunity is certainly there.
And as Danielle said, I mean, there is so many jobs that we currently have. We're already seeing pressures as a wider engineering and construction industry with Brexit recently happened, and we're seeing a big mass migration of qualified engineers migrating back to Europe and all around the world. And equally, the pandemic has made people realise whether they want to stay in the UK or they want to go back to their homes. And again, very well qualified people. So we've actually got a much bigger gap around that. And one of the key ways that our engineering institutions have been trying to plug that gap is actually seeing how we can attract scientifically qualified people, so they don't have to be engineers, into roles to help support us with delivering this transition. And I think we're going to have a much bigger challenge in that, and we all have an obligation, really, I think, to find ways of attracting and inspiring the next generation all the way from primary schools to secondary schools, to really see how we can keep that pipeline high of people qualified to move into more scientific, mathematical and engineering industries.
Brilliant. That's brilliant answers by all of you guys. Maybe a question for both Claire and Danielle over here. The nuclear and offshore wind industry, they both have a sector deal, which recognizes a skill gap. How can we work together between nuclear and offshore wind to close this gap?
Yeah, I think, as I said in my talk, I don't believe it's even just the offshore wind and nuclear sector. I mean, National Grid is, I think, looking at some 250,000 employees that it needs in terms of electrical engineers. So I would argue for, and I would advocate for, an industry-wide, an energy industry-wide call to arms to encourage people into the industry. And I think this has to be in all types of roles, in all possible jobs. And the idea of people being able to move between different technologies shouldn't be lost. The talent pool isn't big enough as it is, and we need to grow it. So we should and can work together.
I think there's really an opportunity for us to create commonality. Well, we already do that for engineers, but can we do that for more roles so that we can create a bigger pool, a greater attraction? And also, you know, I mentioned it before around we need to bring people into our sector. I think we need to be more inclusive and accepting of people that have got more unconventional backgrounds. Particularly a good example is project management. Most project managers that I've met within the nuclear industry have come up through engineering. How can we create a broader pipeline, recognising the skill sets of a broader group of people? Maybe they've got arts backgrounds, but they still bring the skill sets, and in other industries they've got stronger amounts. And looking at best practice from other industries is also a benefit. So Network Rail manage all of the railway infrastructure. They have actually had massive graduate schemes to bring in lots of entrants. But what that does is it inspires people to come into an industry. It creates job opportunities. It trains them up to a certain level. And while they are not likely to stay, and we've got that in all of our industries forever, it does create another pool of people that are kind of competent to a certain level, which then allows them to move on and grow and find what they're special and unique with and what they enjoy most. So I think if we can create the environment, create the pipeline within, we've got an opportunity to share that pool of people and create that flexibility over time. Because I think both of the industries, both you know, offshore wind and nuclear, have had peaks and troughs. So I think the other key thing is having that sustainability in investment and future pipeline, so that not just you know, larger infrastructure providers like you know, EDF as a generator and you know, constructor, but we can actually invest in smaller SMEs, small medium-sized businesses, so that they can also continue to bring in the pipeline because they can see the workload coming in the future.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot for that. And I see that we're going over, but maybe we can have a final question to round it all off to all of you panelists of, you know, as COP26 is coming up, what are some of the key outcomes that you think we need to have in order to, you know, get to net zero, in order to get the green recovery that we've been talking about?
I can maybe go. I think for me, COP is all about big global stuff. It has to tackle the real big questions. I think the last few COPs haven't been very successful since Paris. That was a big one. It really said, okay, we're going to do net zero. And since then, we've got UK, China, US all said we're going to get to net zero. So for me, I think stuff on carbon pricing, how we're actually going to tackle that, how we're going to do that globally, because we need that mechanism, and you know, it has to work globally. If you don't do that, you just get arbitrage and it's not going to work. And I think tackling some of the other bigger things about aviation, maritime, some of these big global industries that really need to decarbonize, that are big emitters, and how can we work on those scales? So a few points for me.
I would agree. I think, to me, we need action now. I mean, if you just need to read the newspapers to see that we're actually running out of time. And I think I would really like to see a much stronger political commitment than we've even seen to date come out of COP. And I think we need to stop arguing about what we need to do and just do it. I think we know what the answers are.
Brilliant. Garrett, I see you have some.
Yeah, I'll just add one thing that I totally agree with Danielle, that we need to do it now. And if you think about how the government managed to find all the money for the COVID pandemic, we need to go find that money again and start spending it, because if we don't, it gets harder and harder, and the cost goes up and up in terms of actually just doing it, let alone the cost of all the problems that it's going to cause. So I think, yes, it's key.
We also need to continue to innovate. We need to find ways where we're still finding the next challenge. So, you know, nuclear fusion is the next kind of like target for us to go for. I think we also need to recognise with all of the prospects that we've been talking, I think Gareth picked up on a couple early tonight, which are in their early days and infancy. You know, they come in with inherent risk with that, and we have to recognise that while you know, major projects or even on small scale projects are risky, there are costs associated with that. We need to try and create an environment within our UK economy, and whether that's by policy through the government or otherwise, where we actually incentivise creating those opportunities to find new technologies to allow us to explore how we can do things differently. Otherwise, we're always going to rely on the same technologies that we're used to, and we may not reach the targets that we really need to create that urgency now.
Great. That was extremely insightful, all of you. And I want to bring this to a close by initially saying thanks a lot to the speakers for, your very insightful presentations, and also such a great discussion we had in this Q&A session. I'm sure we can go on for as long as we can, but this is the end, so we have to stop here. And of course, I'd like to thank all of the audience members for attending, for all of the questions. Unfortunately, we couldn't get to all of them in the time we had, but thank you for participating. And of course, to all of the organizers as well, YGN, Phone, and YEP, that have made this event happen. And if you guys enjoyed the webinar, and if you want to continue to understand more on the lead up to COP, we have our final event for our COP26 series, third one, called the Year of Youth Climate Action, COP26 in your role, coming up on the end of October, the 20th of October. So feel free to sign up on that QR code, or it's in the Eventbrite link that was sent to you in the chat here as well. So with that note, I'd like to thank everyone for attending, and a special thanks to the speakers and of course the organizers for being here and making this event great. So thank you so much, and I hope you have a great rest of the evening.
Thank you.